Hi, this is Dr. Karen Shackelford, and I'm going to give a research presentation. This will be a short presentation on an article by Tao et al. 2023, Learning Through Rewards, Priming and Identification as Psychological Mechanisms of the Effects of LGBTQ plus Narratives on Inclusive Attitudes and Behavioral Intentions. This is a brief presentation, no more than 10 minutes as an example for those in the lab. So I'm going to hit the highlights here. In terms of the background, even though the title has some other theories in it, such as priming, identification, the crux of the study, the main point of the study is about social learning theory and the premise that we learn not only through watching models, other people, but on the reinforcement contingencies of those models. So in the classic Bandura Bobo doll studies, children were witnessed adult models being aggressive. And then in some of those studies, the model was either rewarded or punished for the behaviors. And so the reinforcement or reward structure changed. And then if the person was rewarded, the child was more likely to imitate that behavior. So that's called imitative learning or modeling, and is part of the SLT, social learning theory of Bandura, which there's a publication of that in 1986 and an updated one applied to media in 2001. The original studies considered media psychology because it was watching on a television screen. It was closed circuit television. So I believe that this study is mostly hinging on the theory of social learning theory and also on the incorporation of social learning theory into the general learning model. Let's say model of my mentor, Craig Anderson, and one citation is Anderson and Buckley, 2006. There are many others. It has different forms as well, but I won't get into that. But priming, spreading activation, associative models of learning, and identification theory are also described in this paper. There are maybe more theories described in this paper than I've seen in a long time, at least in a short space. It's published in Media Psych, and the authors go through some things pretty quickly. The intro is pretty short. So the whole premise, the real meat of this study is about what you can do with a narrative in order to increase some outcomes that are pro-social, specifically social justice related narratives, or in this case, it's about a story that includes a waiter waiting on a gay couple, and the waiter is either inclusive towards the couple or exclusive towards the couple. And then on top of that, the social learning theory stuff, the contingencies of reinforcement. So contingencies of reinforcement means that your reinforcement, positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, is contingent upon, so your behavior gets a reinforcer, and then when the people are watching that, and when you're watching the modeling, your behavior, thoughts, or feelings might change in the direction of that reward, or positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Also could be reward or punishment. And those are all different. I won't go through the whole explanation of how reinforcement and punishment, negative reinforcement and punishment are different. So in this study, it was a short story. It was a written narrative, and there were 3 conditions. And the conditions involved the different types of reinforcement. So in one version of the short story, the waiter's behavior was rewarded, and it was inclusive behavior. In another version, the waiter's behavior was punished, and it was exclusive behavior. And then there was a control condition in which it was the same story, but that story of the waiter and the couple, it had no gay couple and it had no reinforcement. Sounds like a very boring edition of the story. So the authors predicted that rewarding inclusive behavior will result in increases in 2 outcomes. So they ran 2 models, actually, skipping ahead a little bit. And the models were, one was for the first dependent measure and one was for the second dependent measure. the first dependent measure was better attitudes, and the second one was more inclusive behavioral intentions of the audience or the reader in this case. So here's the design of the study. It was an experimental design. People only got one of these three conditions, the reading conditions, and they were spread across the different conditions. Side note, I didn't put it in this short version, but you might note that they collected the data on Qualtrics, and they were an adult sample. I think they had 80 people in each of those three conditions. I could add that to this PowerPoint. But the main independent variable, they actually call condition, which is a generic term for that in the study. I found that interesting. I might have called it reward structure or reinforcement structure or something like that, but they called it condition, and they called it reward versus punishment, although there was that third category. Sometimes things don't seem to match up when you read an article, and maybe when you read it over and over, it does. I really thought that it sounded like there were two conditions because they talked about reward and punishment a lot, and then they said, oh, and we also had a control condition. So they didn't talk about it really as three. They talked about it as the two, and then they mentioned that there was a control, which is fine, but it just made it a little harder to dig through as the reader. And as I said, the dependent measures, dependent variables, or DVs. So IVs is independent variable, DVs is dependent variable, and they were measuring these two outcomes, inclusive attitudes and behavioral intentions. They define behavioral intention as asking the participants if they wanted to get to know Chris, who is one of the gay, a member partner of in the gay couple. So Chris is one of the couple, one of the two partners in the couple, and Jefferson is the name of the waiter. So in the paper itself, it mentions Chris and Jefferson, and some of the visuals that I have, it does. So they also, there's a list of hypotheses. Maybe the first three you could call some main hypotheses, but there are also hypotheses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and they are going through the model and telling you what their predictions are for a set of mediators. Here's where some of the other theory that they have mentioned in the intro comes in. Identification theory. Well, they measured identification with the waiter. Remember, that's the character named Jefferson, and he is the actor, the one we're targeting here to look at his behavior and how it's rewarded. Also, feelings toward Chris, they just picked one of the partners. And liking for the story. Now, liking for the story, this is why in the intro they talked about spreading activation and social cognitive network theories. Network theories say that when you feel an emotion, that particular emotion, like liking for the couple, it might spread, I guess that's an affect, but it might spread through your neural network and then therefore touch off other related constructs. And so liking for the story, they believe that positive feeling would spread in your neural network and affect your other reactions to the story. So that's why in the intro we had this spreading activation and neural network kind of language. So I have copied for you here their two main results visuals. The two visuals are separated by the dependent measure. These are the visuals for results for social equality. They also refer to it as gay equality sometimes through the paper, but it's an attitude. So one of their measures is an attitude, and one of their measures is a behavior. The behavior is a behavioral intention, and that's also called a behavioroid measure because it's not actual behavior. Chris is a fictional character and you don't meet him, but it's your theoretical intentions toward him. So this is a bit, maybe takes a little challenge to dig into. They call this rewards, and they say reference equals punishment. They're showing you their output for just the reward part. And they did predict that the reward part would be the one that would show these relationships. So that kind of takes a little digging to figure out. Here they're showing you the whole model. This is a brief talk, so I'm not going to get into every little path here. If I were doing a larger talk, I might do that. But basically, except for the paths through enjoyment, which are, you see, labeled non-significant, there are relationships between the reward that you see, your feelings toward Chris, the partner, and support for gay equality. And then if you go down the bottom arch of this paper, rewards leads to identification with the waiter, leads to support for gay equality. And so both of those paths, the Chris path and the Jefferson path, the waiter who was rewarded and the partner of the couple who was treated inclusively, led to increased support for gay equality. And those are the betas that are significant, and you see the asterisks for the significant ones and NSs for the ones that are insignificant. And then this is the second set of results. This is for the behavioral intention. So would you want to get to know Chris? So in the reward, this is the whole reward panel. You can go through feelings towards Chris, and that shows increases. So Chris, Jefferson gets rewarded for being inclusive. His feelings toward Chris are more positive, the person's feelings towards Chris, and that leads to greater intentions to befriend Chris. And then on the bottom, rewards leads to identification with the waiter who is inclusive, and that leads to the readers, greater intentions to befriend Chris. One little difference here in the internal pass-through enjoyment, there is a link between just enjoyment of the story and your intention to befriend Chris. So they did this in terms of the model, and there's more details with the statistics there. But I would say, in conclusion, that what this study demonstrates, the main gist of it, is that people's attitudes and intended behaviors can be influenced by a narrative where good behavior is rewarded. So in a social context, if you have a story where a character is performing inclusive behaviors towards a gay couple, that reward structure leads to more pro-social behavioral intentions and more positive pro-social attitudes, and that rewarding good behavior is more effective than punishing antisocial behavior in the context of a narrative. The narrative, that one of the prime ideas for this is the narrative has a stance, and in the stance, in the story world, we like that the waiter is inclusive, and that's what this shows. Thank you.